All right, so yeah, one of these things that comes up when you're working with Maya, you know, we haven't really covered this yet. There's curves, right? We can do curves modeling. So there's different sort of subcategories of curves. There's the EP curve tool. There are arcs. I don't know if you guys know this, but you can create a simple arc as well. For this, it's kind of useful if you go to snap points. You can click on the arc tool, click once, click a second time, click a third, if it'll behave, and it creates an arc. Again, I find that some of the curves tools in Maya a bit clumsy, mainly probably because I'm coming from a 3ds Max background, but what I'm going to do is create with a Bezier curve. Generally speaking, I usually like to do this in a front view or a top-down view. In this case, I'm going to be making kind of like a vaulted ceiling, sort of similar to like a Gothic style of architecture. So if we just take a look, vaulted ceiling. All right, something like this. It looks fairly complicated, yes? Yeah, a little bit of a pain in the butt to do something like this. But I'm going to show you a couple of kind of quick cheats to get something like this knocked out real fast and painless, hopefully. So I've got Vertex Snap on, so that's up here, Vertex Snap. And then I'm going to go to the Bezier tool. I kind of like the Bezier because I find it gives me more precise control. I can go from curve to sharp angles very easily. So I'm going to go and hit that. Now, I should be paying attention to scale, but you know what? I can probably adjust scale after. So let me just go into my grid settings actually before I do anything. I'll go to grid, display, grid lines every 10 units. I'm going to set this grid lines every 100 units and make this 15,000. Sorry, 1,500 units. Yeah, that's good. So I'm dealing with a pretty good size scale here. And I generally like to kind of snap to the grid. So yeah, I'm actually snapping to vertex when I should be snapping to grid. So I'm going to switch that off, the snap to points, and go snap to grid. So I'll go out. I'm going to just kind of roughly count here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So I'm going to go 10 points out from the center line. I'm going to click and drag as I go as well. So I'm going to click and drag out. I should probably keep track of this too. 2, 4, 6, 8. And if I go up here and just click once, it's going to create a sharp point. If I go back down over here, and I'll count out 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And then click and drag. Again, 2, 4, 6, 8. So that's nice and balanced, right? That's done. Hit W. So that is the kind of profile in one direction. So let me turn off the grid snap. I'll jump out of this and go to perspective view. So there's this sort of archway, right? Let's move this along. This is moving along Z. You know, I may just actually keep the snap on, snap to grid on. I'm going to move this out. I guess it's about 200 units in that direction. Hit Control D to duplicate. 200 units in the opposite direction, so minus 200 on Z, plus 200 on Z. You know, if you drew this in the left view, then it'd be going along X as opposed to Z. And very simply, what I'm going to do is create what's called a loft. So the loft will, so if I hold Shift and click and drag over the second line, I can go to Surfaces, Loft. Now you can just click on this. It creates what is known as a NURBS surface. So this is something I mentioned a little earlier. If you go to Control Vertices, you've got these kind of like control verts hovering off in space, and you can kind of warp the shape and stuff. I'm not a particularly huge fan of that. Again, it's part of a tool set that I really don't use in general. So what I tend to do is go into Surfaces and then go to the Options for Loft. So I'm going to show you guys a few variations on this, some common mistakes, and I'll show you the ideal settings for this. So there's number of spans. This is in NURBS. So you see the output here is what's important, the NURBS, right? We actually don't want that. We want this to be in polygons. So I'm going to just hit apply and check this out. It's an ungodly mess, right? Not clean, not easy to deal with. It's gross. So I'm going to undo that, and that's because you know, once you switch from NURBS to polygons, you've got a few options to modify. So we've got the type, and in this case I want quad, right? Nice clean quad based mesh. I've seen some people make the mistake of setting this to standard fit. I really wish I could tell you in detail what this means, but I think in areas of more curvature, it actually will subdivide the mesh. And you see this actually breaks the grid pattern. So we actually wind up getting polygons that are actually not just 4-sided, but in fact this would be 6-sided because of the break here from this line, right? So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, actually sorry, 5 instead of 4 sides. So it kind of makes a mesh that's a little messy and sloppy, and I've seen people do this and then they're going through and clicking on the extra edges they don't want and then taking them out. And if you don't hit control backspace, so let's say you just grab an edge and hit backspace, you actually leave behind vertices, which is messy as well, and we don't want that. So any opportunity you have to screw things up, try to avoid it. Try to keep things clean, simple, organized, right? So the option, not standard fit, not control points, not count, but I want to set this to general. So quads and then general for tessellation method. Tessellation meaning the layout of the polygons basically, or the distribution of polygons. So you've got, again, let me just focus in on this. You've got the tessellation controls. So there's, this is one thing that drives me nuts about Maya. I find a lot of the language is kind of nerdy mathematical language. It's not always user friendly, but you've got two types of controls. One controls the profile, which is that curvature that I've drawn out, and the other one controls how many edges or loops or definition do we get from the bridge between the two shapes. So if I hit apply, we've got a standard 3x3. That sucks. So I'm gonna check this out. I always forget. I think the curvature is defined by the V shape here. If I hit apply, no, you see it's actually adding more spans lengthwise. So from the two shapes in between. So in this case, I don't really need a ton of mesh in that direction. So I'm just undoing and then hitting apply. What I do want are the number of U-type tessellations or divisions. So the higher this goes, the more it will reflect, right, the curvature that I drew out. Simple, yeah? All right. Now I can, let's just grab all the objects. I'm going to shift click that and delete the two edges. Now you could, in fact, keep these two edges if you wanted to. The original Bezier shapes, I should say. Just turn off the snap to grid. Come on. There we go. Oh, right. So one of the things that's happening, I should mention this. So I'm grabbing one of these shapes, and it's actually pulling it across. What I really want to do is make sure that the history is deleted on this, right? So I'm going to go to Edit, Delete by History. Now, I may undo and redo this again, but I'm pretty confident that the profile it's minimal enough that I can still control it easily, but it's got enough definition that it clearly and cleanly defines that arching characteristic, right? So I think this is a good enough shape. Okay, so now since I've deleted the history, I went to Edit, Delete by History. I should be able to grab those two spline shapes. In fact, I could probably just delete one of them and keep one just in case. Not a bad idea to kind of keep keep shapes like this. I know some people actually keep huge catalogs that they built over the years. So they just throw them all into one Maya file and they can just quickly bang these things back out. Next step, going to rotate. Before I rotate, Control D to duplicate and then rotate. I should make sure I'm on angle snap, which it looks like I am. That's good. So I'll go 90 degrees. All right, so before I do this, I think what I'm going to do, I'll undo. Let's go back to object mode. I just want to make sure. So Maya also is a little bit tricky because sometimes when you undo, it doesn't always go back a full step. Sometimes, like if you do an extrusion but you don't see it extrude and you click somewhere, technically the extrusion may happen, but you'll have two polys sitting on top of each other. So sometimes I find I have to undo twice. So I just did that now because I want to make sure I'm not missing anything or having like two copies of that mesh still sitting there. So I'm just doing a little extrusion on the local Z. That's actually not what I want either. So I'm going to hit there's a little reset kind of button here. which aligns things to the world. So it's one of the reasons I like building things cleanly along a straight XYZ axis, is that it's so easy to get clean extrusions, clean mesh essentially. So I'm just going to make this thing a little bit wider here. There we go. Click off of that, go back to object mode, Control D, and then rotate. So I now have at least enough kind of overlap, right? So what's great about this? I'm going to grab one mesh, then the other. Go to Mesh, Booleans. I'll try Union. And actually, Union works perfectly in this case. You see that? Awesome, yeah? And you can flip through these. So sometimes you get weird results. Like earlier today, I did this exact same example, got totally different results. So I had to switch between union, difference, intersection. Depending on what you see, you may have to, you know, modify that. So keep that in mind. Now, something else that's happening here too. I want to be very, very careful. I think I want to just take out these extra edges for now. I don't think they're going to serve me any purpose, so I'm going to just try to carefully take them out. So I'm double-clicking those loops. You know, I probably could have just scaled the original. So hitting Control, backspace, and that's gone. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to grab, I think I may just try one of these actually. I'll grab this loop. It's a really interesting function in Maya where we can actually convert selections into other types of objects. So if I go spacebar, by the way, I've set this to show modeling only. I can go modify, convert polygon edges to curve. So it'll actually create a new, essentially NURBS-based curve, like so, out of that shape. Okay. By the way, my polys, they're facing, you know, if I want to look at this from the inside, I want to flip the polygon. So I'm going to go to Mesh Display, reverse the display, so we get kind of correct shading from inside the view of this thing. I'm going to grab that, try to grab just that spline, I guess. Okay, so that's sitting there. Now, what I may want to do, like in a lot of this architecture, there's actually a fair amount of like trim detail. So I'm going to quickly build using cylinders. There's a cylinder there. I'm going to make this a little bigger, maybe a radius of like 10 inches. Make this a little bit higher, 5 inches. And again, you want to think about this too. So like, I'm going to be making kind of a trim for this sort of stuff. This actually might be too big now if I take a look at it, but yeah, it's a little too big. But make this a radius of like 6. That should be okay. Okay, so yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking like I want this to be a lower poly environment, if I'm planning on smoothing it, I may actually use less divisions. Just as a point of reference, when we make a mesh smooth and we want it to be cylindrical or spherical, we usually use a minimum of 8 subdivisions, and we go in factors of 8. So 8, 16, 32, 64, or it can be 48, something in between. But divisions of 8 are pretty clean and even. In this case, I don't plan on smoothing this, so I'm okay using a few more subdivisions. But I do want to be careful not to overload it, because I know this thing is going to be like moved along a path, let's say. So I'm going to move this thing roughly into position. I guess, yeah, this should probably work here. Hit Control D. You'll see where I'm going in a second. Yeah, let's do that. Hit Control D again. Maybe I'll make this one a little bit smaller. Something like that. So I'm going to take all 3 of these, go to Mesh, Boolean, and do a union. So again, this becomes one solid piece of mesh. And I've got a little trick to this because I like the mesh to be pretty clean. So I'm going to show you kind of a little trick that I use for this. I'm going to actually go to object mode for a second, hit Control 1 to isolate just this piece. I'm going to go to face mode, select the edges around, which are clean quad-based meshes. I'm going to invert the selection, Control-Shift-I, hit delete. Go to edge mode, double-click each one, shift right click and then fill hole. So if you really need to, you could, in theory, if you wanted to make cleaner mesh on top, let's just do an offset. Oh my god, so many divisions. Too many divisions. This would actually be a simple way to actually tidy up the mesh if you had to. In this case, I'm not worrying about it, and then I could simply go to that middle face and just go merge to center. Clean. This is sometimes a requirement when you're modeling. It depends on the situation, but for now I'm just going to leave it as a flat sort of surface. Okay, let's unhide everything else. Control 1. Where's that line? It's right there, right? We'll take this object. I'm going to just push it down so it's just kind of at the base here of the grid. I'm going to grab these two. Let's hit Control 1 again. So I've just got this kind of thing visible, right? If I go to face mode, grab this face, shift click on that line, shift right click and go to extrude faces. There's actually a hidden option in here called selected. Curve selected. If I hit apply, it may do something a little crazy there, but for the most part, you see it's actually giving me this really cool architectural feature, right? So I'm going to probably try to work with this. I'm going to undo. By the way, when you first do this, usually the divisions are really low. They're like division 1, division 2. So when you hit apply, it's going to just only follow along a certain amount of the path. So I'm going to just crank up the divisions a little bit. Yeah, I should really see what's happening with that curve there, but okay. Let's just undo a little bit. Okay, so I'll try that one more time. So I'll bump this up to maybe like 16. Yeah, plane can work too, but yeah, it's just being a little goofy. Yeah, let me try it. If I flip this around, I'll delete the rest here. I have a feeling it's still going to do the same thing. I mean, I don't know how clean that curve is either, but yeah, it's still kind of producing a bit of a weird result, but let me make this a little larger as well. Yeah, so I may just, I'm going to just kind of play around this. The worst case scenario is I'll delete all this messy crap over here later, and I'll just extrude the end out because it's roughly in the correct angle. So, yeah, let's take this out, take that garbage, get that garbage out of here. Go to edge. And let's do an extrude edge. This time it's just going to follow along the actual orientation here, so I can literally just kind of pull that out, right? So that works. Again, there may be a little bit of a mess down here as well, so I'm going to just grab this crap and chuck it out. So grab this stuff that I can see, deselect what I want to keep, and then hit delete, right? Okay, so that kind of works. Unhide, right? Now we've got a little architectural trim. And next up, let's see what we can do here. So I'm going to take this and go to, let's just take a look at the movement here. This is along X here. So I'm going to go, I'm going to reset the pivot. So I'm going to go to D on the keyboard, which makes the pivot live. I'm going to snap to, I could snap to grid, I guess, in this point. So I'm going to snap to the center of the grid here. This makes things easier. Turn off D again. Yeah, one mistake I think I made actually with this path thing is when I did the Boolean, I should have actually done a modify freeze transforms, because I think it's also flipped the object. You guys may have noticed that, eh? It's kind of flipped. So I think freezing the transforms actually would have made that thing follow the path a lot cleaner. But I'm just going to move ahead for now. We'll go to mesh, mirror. So I'm going to open up the mirror options. So I want to go, I think, negative on X, and I'll try this. Nope, wrong direction. Go positive on X. And we see we've got a merged. It actually kind of flips it, and it merges and welds along the center line. So next up, I'll do Z. Try that along positive, and there we go. We've got our trim done, right? Isn't that badass? Look at that. Fucking right. That's in the video, folks. So yeah, now, you know, you could, there's usually like little architectural elements that'll be placed underneath that, like a little sort of emblem or maybe a flower or something. I'm not necessarily going to get into that, but one thing I should mention, by the way, I do want you guys to unwrap as you go. I'm not looking for clean unwraps necessarily, but, and this is more important for your props. You know, we got a lot of cheats that we can use. Do you guys remember unwrapping, hopefully from last semester? Or maybe. So simple ways to go about it. You can go to the UV editor. This looks like a disaster right now, but if we take, let me just turn up the grid too. So I'm kind of looking at this from below. I'll grab this guy, all of this stuff. For me, a lot of times you can get very simple, basic, quick unwraps if we simply go to planar, cylinder, spherical, or automatic base unwrapping. Yeah. Yeah, so since this thing can be viewed from kind of a bottom view, I would basically go to UV map, planar, and remember, you want to, projecting basically means what view is it looking at this object from. In this case, I want it to be the vertical axis, which is Y. So it's going to take a look at this from Y. I'm going to hit project. Kind of clean, kind of not, right? It's going to be stretched along the sides because those sides are kind of perpendicular. It's going to stretch, right? So what I would have to do, very simply, is let's go to face mode here. Take this, shift, right click. Oh yeah, I gotta, sorry. Yeah, I have to do a cut and sew. So I'm going to, yeah, let's just use the cut tool. I'm going to cut along here, like so. So it's just going to split this open. And then if we go to shell, just grab all the shell pieces and we can do unfold. And then we can do layout. Come on, layout. Not being the cleanest right now, but that's okay. Anyway, so that's kind of a basic idea. And if you take a look at the UVs, right, they're a lot cleaner. There's no distortion, and it's super fast, right? I could get into the packing, but I'm going to do that a bit later on. So that's kind of a quick start in terms of unwrapping, you know, getting UVs done. Now, what's great about this is that I built this in a modular fashion. So if you remember at the beginning, I made this thing about 200 inches, I think, across. So I'm going to grab this piece and this piece. You know, I could optimize this. I probably should have done it earlier, but one thing I will often do, so let's say this is a lot of mesh here for me. If I'm looking at it, I may like it, I may not, but let me just take a look at the poly count. Faces, this says 2,520 faces, so it's actually not terrible for this individual piece right here. So I think I'll leave that alone. This piece is actually pretty light and pretty easy. If I go to mesh display, I can do a soften harden edge, and let me try 30 degrees. Oops, I don't want to do them all actually. Let's grab this piece alone. I'll set this maybe to like 15. I'll try that and apply. So if you see what happens here, the smoothing is nice and continuous along the curvature, but as soon as there's a big angle change, so this change in the, here, let me just undo and redo so you guys can see that. So let's, come on. Yeah, it's actually shading okay. Sometimes what will happen is like if there's too much smoothing, you see it just smooths across here. So you may have to go to the smooth, soften harden edge tool and set the angles low enough so that you get a nice split here. Or you can manually go by section and smooth there. So you may in fact need to do that. So let's just do that real quick. Okay, so that'll be done in a second. There we go. Oops, got one missing. Okay, so face down to here. Oops, yeah, that's good. Close that up. Okay, so we get, you know, good sort of smoothing. We get the appropriate kind of sharpness or creasing across these areas. So yeah, next up, I would probably want to delete history. So I'm going to just quickly do that for each part here. I'll go edit, delete all by history, and do the same thing. There we go. Now, keep in mind there's actually a few things left over here, so I may want to just kind of get rid of this stuff. If you want to keep your curve, you can, but in this case, I'm just going to actually, yeah, keep that lofted surface and delete everything else. So it keeps things nice and tidy. It's one thing you have to kind of keep in mind with Maya is it can leave a lot of kind of sloppy garbage behind in your scene, so sometimes you have to kind of delete that stuff out. So grab both these pieces, shift, right click, and combine if this is what you're happy with. And what's great about this now, yeah, let me go to Edit, Duplicate, Special. I'm going to leave this, I'll reset this actually to its defaults, set this to instance, make the parent group world. Translate, I scaled this thing out a bit more, so I think it's going to be like translate 220, let's say, on X. And I'm going to make a couple copies just to start. Let's do 440. Getting close. Better. So I'm going to just adjust the number a bit. Ah, that's actually pretty good. So I got 560. Maybe 600 will do. Ah, too much. 580. Oh, so close. 570. Yeah, this is why, you know, I should have been a little bit smarter with my grid setup and everything, but if you take a look, these things are all kind of lined up now, and it's so easy to get super fast. This is one of the beauties of modular building, right? Building one piece, you know, breaking things down into a single repetitive element that you can reproduce. It creates this, you know, look at that. I mean, I haven't finished it yet, but, and this is already unwrapped, by the way, right? So I did the smallest component of the set that I could figure I could break down. Next, what I can do is grab all these things. I could do shift, right click, and combine. And then if we go to, let's just go to vertex mode. I'm going to shift, drag across this area, the sort of gaps in between. And then I'll just simply do a merge vertices within a certain threshold. So shift, right click, merge verts. And I'll just zoom in. I'm going to have to increase the threshold until they just, oh, come on. It's probably like 10. There we go. Because the distance is in centimeters, right? So a distance within 10 centimeters, they should snap. If you go higher, by the way, like 500, you'll see it just collapses them down to this. So that's one thing you have to be careful of when you do any kind of merge vert, is kind of be aware of the scale you're on. Make sure you don't inadvertently collapse things together that shouldn't be collapsed, right? Now, if we take a look at that edge, it is one solid edge. There aren't duplicate vertices, right? Other beautiful thing. Let's go to edge mode here. So I'm going to, actually, yeah, let me just stay in full screen here. I'm going to go to like a left view, I guess. Maybe a front view, I suppose, is best. There we go. So I've selected around all this stuff. I mainly want to select, so I'm going to deselect all this. I just want the bottom edges here. So if I go, let's see, I'll take a look at this. So I've only got those bottom edges, right? So now if I do shift, right click, extrude, you see that the angle is off on a weird, it's like kind of weirdly angled. So what I will do is often reset this so it becomes aligned to the world. Pull this, why won't it pull straight down? What is happening? Maya, man, sometimes gets crazy. Well, let me pull it up to start with. I'm going to just kind of release this. Actually, I'll pull it a little higher up. There's something very odd going on here. It's really weird. Anyways, I'm going to, yeah, let's leave that as is. This is going to be very annoying. Anyways, yeah, my intention was to extrude straight down, but this is very odd. What is happening? So yeah, a reboot of Maya, just closing it, reopening the file, and doing a normal extrude. I don't know what it is. Maya 16 and 17, when it comes to modeling, it's still a little buggy, so sometimes you just got to save your work and pray for the best. Yeah, so now I can pull this down, and you see I've got archways, right? Next step, I could, let me go back to the front view. So I'm going to kind of deselect, this might be a little tricky for you guys. I'm going to deselect the edges across here. Let's just take those out. So what I'm leaving behind are, you can't quite see them. They're edges perpendicular to the screen. Hopefully this will work, but I'm not holding my breath. Okay. So I've left these edges here. I'm going to see if I can bridge these things together without a complete disaster. No. I'll have to do it by hand. So what I'm going to do, and again, you can actually, sometimes this happens, like if I'm modeling. So here's a bridge I'm doing here. So let's say this is a windowsill that you need to make, right? You could start by doing this, by bridging together that edge. And if you want to, you could do the same thing across here. Oops, wrong edge. There we go. Bridging that. So I'm hitting G, by the way. That's the repeat command. And I can kind of do the same thing if I shift double click. Hit G. Oops. Grab that by accident. I don't want that. Hit G. There we go. So that bridges that. By the way, this is creating clean topology with quads, right? I'm leaving a little triangle at the top, and that's okay. Now let's say you're like, man, I don't want to have to do the rest on the other side, blah, blah, blah. Well, we can kind of cheat the system. So, again, being lazy. It's a smart kind of lazy. Just make sure it's a clean selection from below here. Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to flip the selection around. Control-Shift-I, delete. Modular building, right? Simplest possible chunks. Let's go to modify. Again, let me just double check my axis on this thing. I don't know where this thing is moving. That's on Z. So yeah, we'll go to mesh, mirror. I think that'll be negative. I don't know. Nope. Positive. Should have left it there. Oops. Positive. Oh. Yeah, I guess, I gotta double check my pivot, by the way. So the pivot seems to be going a little goofy. Let's take a look at the move tool. I'll hit D. So this is always important. You know, you want to make sure your pivots are like aligned to the world. They're, you know, on a nice kind of center line. So I'm going to go to vertex mode here. And I probably should have gone back to my first part as well. There we go. So that's, yeah, it's nice and neat. Let's hit apply on this. There we go. Huh, still being kind of weird. All right. So I'm gonna not trust mine in this case and just manually do this. So it's funny. I hate to say it. Max would just do this first shot. It would just work, but we got what we got, right? We're gonna have to deal with it for now. Yeah, I really wish I could like sit down with the Autodesk people and just give them a good talking to. Well, they own both tools, right? 3D Max and Maya, and Max just works, man. When you do this stuff, it just does the job. But well, we'll get this thing going. All right, so again, I'm going to just kind of delete the excess that I don't need. I may, in fact, also extrude the bottom here. So let's say this needs to go a little bit lower for like the base of this. So I'll go to Edge. Actually, I don't need to double click all the way around, so I'm just going to shift double click from here to here. Same thing here. Extrude. I usually like to reset this to make sure it's aligned to the world, so it will go straight down. And of course, Maya's doing the same thing again. Why? Oh, hold on a second. Let's turn this off. Let's try this one more time. Okay, so that looks better. There we go. Yeah, you know what I think I did? I must have left, because I just turned this off, I left the one of the snaps on. So I think that's what was screwing me up last time. Okay, so. Got something else weird here. By the way, whenever you see an error in your mesh, you really need to investigate. So I'm kind of doing that right now. I'm just double checking. I think when I did the extrusion, I may have done an accidental double extrusion. You guys see that? That is not good. So if you ever do something like this, it's best to kind of do the detective work, figure out what's going on. Ooh, yeah. Not nice. I do not like. It can be a little tricky to deal with too. So, I'll tell you what. What am I going to do? Yeah, let's see. I'm going to just go into face mode. Let's grab both of these faces, and I'm just going to pull them up. Right, that kind of solves the problem. I can kind of see the layout of what's going on now. And if I grab, let's say, oh wow, what did I do? Okay, I'm going to nuke it. Nuke it, gone. When in doubt, delete. Yeah, because the last thing you want to do is kind of keep an error continuing through a model and just having it get worse and worse. So I'm going to just re-extrude this. I think I may have, so this is what I was saying earlier about, you know, sometimes you do an extrusion, but then you don't do anything, you don't make a move, and you just click off and you do it again. That's sort of the kind of error that you can run into, and that's not really good or productive. So I'm re-extruding this back out. It's actually good that I'm making some of these mistakes, because that's sort of what you guys will most likely be doing a lot of anyways. Sorry to say. I'll do a bridge. Oh, why did you select? I'll go to bridge, so that's shift right click. So that should be clean. G to repeat the last command. All right, so I got that lip back in there. Let's go back to edge mode. This should be clean. So again, a lot of times I grab a piece. You can tell it's kind of working cleanly just by the way you can move, you know, individual components or a little cluster of small components. Shift right click, extrude again. Hit the reset. So I'm moving perfectly along Z. There we go. Yeah, I think it's because I had a snap on last time. That's what sort of screwed me up. Okay, so let's get back into this thing. Again, I should do an unwrap. I'm going to just kind of skip past that. We can cover things in detail more next week if you guys want. So we'll go back to edits, duplicate special, and I should be able to just use the last commands there. Right? So there is kind of your rough, right, breakdown of your Gothic archways. Okay. Again, you can add all the embellishments. Do that in a modular basis. So you put it at the one corner before you do all this, you know, mirroring, welding, and all that sort of stuff. But I hope that kind of gives you guys an idea of how fast you can move and work inside of Maya, right? I mean, I think that's probably been about 30 minutes or so. I do want to cover one other thing really quickly related to these kind of sort of spline mesh objects. Okay. So let me just make a new file. There we go. Okay, so actually I'll go to front view. Zoom out again. So yeah, some of you guys maybe, let me fix my grid too, because I noticed, I think I set my grid super massive, so I'll kind of work more on a regular scale. Grid lines every 20 units, and this will go for like 50, sorry, yeah, let's do every 10 actually, that's good. Okay, so yeah, if you want to make like columns and stuff like that, I noticed somebody earlier today was kind of having some difficulty with this, so I'll go over that kind of example, I guess. So if you're making a column, you can do it kind of all in one shot, or you can do it in pieces. It's not a bad idea to do it in separate pieces. So one thing you want to do is avoid kind of any waste or overlap. So I'm going to let me just start kind of with the base, I guess. Let's do this. I should actually snap to grid, so I'm going to turn on snap to grid. Okay, go one out. So that's my trick, by the way. Do you guys see that? To get a nice circular curve, depending on how you're measuring things. So right now I'm just doing single click, going across, single click. Left click and drag gives you a Bezier. Single click, so you go from sharp to curved, right? Let's say I go out a bit further, right? So it's for that Bezier, it's a click and drag, and then single click. Let's say I do something along these lines. Now I don't necessarily need to, you know, close this, right? So if I go into perspective, let's just zoom in on that thing. You can go to, so this, by the way, it's based on the center line of the world, the lofting or sweeping. So if I go select the curve, I can go to surfaces and do a revolve. So this will revolve around the y-axis, which is correct. I'm going to hit apply. And there's a column base, right? Super easy, clean. Remember, this is similar to the loft options. So I don't want NURBs, right? I want this to be in polygons. I want it to be in general. And let's hit apply. And nothing. So you want to make sure you undo, because something actually did happen, but I'm going to have to increase the V, which is the number of times it goes around, right? So this creates kind of a square base. The more steps I increase this, let's say I go to 16, it should give you roughly 16, right, divisions around this axis, right, going across here. So I'm going to want this to be maybe a little more rounded. Again, if you don't plan on smoothing this, then you can go with a few more polys. So maybe like 32. It's not bad. The other thing is we were losing the shape, so it's super low poly in this respect. So I have to actually increase the U, the number of U divisions. Hit that. It's better. Crank this up to 30 for now, right? So that's pretty decent. Couple of issues though, and I'll get to that in a second. First thing is the mesh is inside out, right? So go mesh display, reverse. Issue number one solved. Let's grab the, let's grab that spline and just, we can actually, yeah, I gotta delete the history on this thing again. Edit, delete by history. So there's a lot of excess edges. There's edges across here that actually don't do anything to define the shape, so I would take those out. Same here. So these are not doing anything. They're just kind of taking up unnecessary polys in the scene, right? Same thing across the top. Like I probably won't see the column. Maybe I'll have it kind of come up from here. So I'll just take that, delete that, and go to edge. And you can keep this as one piece or maybe have a separate cylinder if you like. But in this case, I'll keep it as one piece. Extrude edge. Again, I'll reset to align this to the world and pull up. Not bad, right? Take this, mesh, if it is symmetrical top and bottom. Mesh, mirror. Vertical axis is Y, and I'm probably going to mirror on Y. Oops. Let's try negative. I don't know. We'll see what happens here. Wrong way. I should double check, by the way. Let me just see where my pivots are. I got to really see where that is. So you see my pivots at the base of this object, right? So I've hit D and just slide it up near that sort of center line of the mesh. Not exact, but in this case, I'm okay being a little loose. I'll go to mirror again. Oh, what are you doing? By the way, you can move this axis while you're in the mirror tool. It's a live tool, so you can kind of slide it up. So in this case, I'm still having some weird difficulties with it. So I'm just going to flip this guy around from positive to negative. So now we can go top and bottom, right? What's great about this is that they're, you know, now this columns are fairly basic. You know, unless you're doing hyper detailed like filigree, which is like kind of flowers, vinery and stuff like that around it, I won't just count like a simple revolve. A revolve on its own is not going to count as a prop. You have to go further and edit this further. I'll show you maybe another example of this in a second, but let's say we, what am I going to do? Yeah, I'm going to just bevel this. So we could have one example here where we have And I'll adjust the fractions here so they're more equidistant or equally spaced, right? So we can take those, we can take this. So I'm just going to grab these, and then what I'm going to do is, I guess I'll do a bevel. Let's try that. Again, take the segments down, take the fraction down, which is the spacing. Maybe make this like a 0.25. See what that looks like. That's not bad. Then I can go into face mode. Okay, and then I'll do extrude. In this case, I'll keep the local Z, and then I can pull those in. So we've got simple column. Maybe a last step if I want to get real fancy. You know, you can do this a bunch of ways. I could separate the cylinder. I could maybe make a new one. So what I'm going to do, maybe I'll just hide this thing. So I'm going to hit H to hide it. So let's say I want to try something different. So a lot of times I experiment. I figure maybe there's a different way of doing something. Especially in the early phases of a project, I will test a lot of stuff out. So I'm going to go and take the radius, maybe take this up to like, ooh, that's too big. 20, I think? No, like 15. Nope. 10, sure. 10 is good. I'm going to take the height up to like 25. No. Let's do 80 for now. Right now, the height doesn't exactly matter. I just want to get a nice centered cylinder. I'm going to hit Control D, and I'm going to cheat the system a bit. So I've got a duplicate. I'm going to pull the duplicate. Again, let's turn off the snap. I'm going to pull this thing out, scale this thing down. So the pivot, technically, of the object is still dead center of the world, but I'm sort of skewing this by going into sub-object mode. Remember, I talked a little bit about this last week. You can kind of cheat things by doing this. So I'm going to go to Manipulator. So I double-click the Scale tool and switch from Object, which is looking at the object's original pivot, which is center of world, switching it to the center of the manipulation or selection. I'm going to scale this thing way, way down. And then with everything still selected, oops, yeah, let's double click it all to get it all, or select it all. Okay, let's take a look at that. See, I want this to kind of carve in, let's say, like so. So yeah, now I can take this guy. I'm going to actually make it a little bit longer as well, just because if I'm going to do Boolean, it's cleaner sometimes when you have a little bit of excess overhanging. You'll see what I'm doing in a second. So I'm going to go Edit, Duplicate, Special. Let's reset. Copies are fine. Instances are good too. Doesn't really matter. Rotate every 20 degrees times 17. That is on Y. I believe that's correct. See, it's going all the way around. And what I'll do, I find Boolean is a little more effective this way. So if I combine these, so I'll Shift right click, combine all the duplicates, take the column, Shift select the notches, which are going to be cutouts. I can go to Mesh Boolean Difference. Now we've got a real Roman column, right? And now we can do things like I was going to do earlier. We can go across the center line. We can do, maybe I'll start with a connect. So the connect creates one simple connecting edge across the middle, which I can then turn into beveled edges, which I can then bevel again, and then create that little notch. Or if you really want to get fancy, it's too much, right? Yeah, we can create like a torus. Where are you at, torus? You know, so if you wanted to create notches, you can do this a different way, right? We can do, let's do section radius. That's too big. Let's do 10. And I'll set this down. I'm just kind of tweaking the numbers a bit so I get just the kind of right amount of kind of cutout. So move this up about so high. Again, duplicate special, right? I'm going to reset again. Always a little paranoid, which is not a bad thing in 3D sometimes. Move up 10 units, make, I don't know, 5. I think I wanted like 5 sections, so I'll make 4 copies of this. Not quite. Duplicate special. Try 15 on Y. That's better. And then I'll just, let's try 12 actually. Something in between-ish. Okay. So again, I'll combine these copies. So grab the column first, shift-click on the toruses. Again, I should probably be paying attention to like the counts here. Like I usually like these edges to line up. They actually line up fairly well from the original cylinder to this column, but again, usually, I'm doing this kind of quick, but usually I would match the number of divisions on the cylinder to the number of divisions on the toruses to get cleaner mesh that I don't have to worry about cleaning up so much. But for demonstration purposes, this works, I think. So I'll do a difference. Right. So hopefully that gives you the idea of the power of using as a starting point, right? I always think about things in their simplest shapes: profiles, silhouettes, outlines. I like to break things down almost into their like most base shape, and then I can quickly build up from there, right? And you see how fast you can work if you think in those terms. So I hope that helps you guys out a bit. So yeah, one last note I wanted to make here. So like swapping out, like let's say I grab, there's this column here, this new piece that I made. So if I prefer this, I'm just going to kind of scale this guy up to match. Like so. That's actually not too bad. Okay, I'm going to roughly kind of center this and maybe just scale it up vertically here. So what I'll simply do is actually hit Control-1. So I'm isolating that part that I just made. I'm going to go to face mode. And you can delete this if you want, or if I do shift right click, extract. Extract actually, sorry, 1 second. Let me get into object mode here. So extract actually split this thing off. So I don't necessarily have to delete that thing I made. Maybe the director comes by and says, you know what, that sort of sucked. So let's say I can now just hit H to hide that piece. So now I can show my director two options, right? So I can, quickly kind of go between a few different variations of this thing. I'm just going to increase the, turn on what's called anti-aliasing, so you guys can get a better look at that, right? So I'll just do show all again, so we can kind of see show all. So I could even do this. I can just clone this thing, move it over, and then have kind of like option A, option B, right? Pretty cool. All right, so that's kind of a quick rundown.